This is an end feed fitting which goes onto copper tube. As you can see, it's just a plain fitting. There's no solder inside it. We actually will put the solder inside, and I'm going to show you what to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare the copper tube for soldering. So the two ends that's going to go into the fitting, I'm just going to use wire wool because that's what I use. And just literally wrap the wire wool around the pipe, give it a bit of a twist, and as you can see it's nice and shiny now, that end is. So there's one, and then there's the other end. Now I'm using 22mm pipe. You just need to clean about an inch up from the pipe, that'll be plenty. Now one other thing that I do, because it makes good practice, not everybody does this, especially with new fittings, but I just like to give it a quick wipe inside on both ends of it. But you have to just make sure that there's no strands of wire wool hanging out the end of this, because a little strand is enough for water to leak out of. So just make sure that there's no strands or anything. Next we get our flux, and we just need to put a smear all the way around the tube only. And once that's done, just pull it into the fitting. And again, you want to make sure that when you pull it around, that there's going to be enough flux that's going to cover the whole of the inside of this fitting. So another smear around this end. Then we want to, there we go. Now what I'm going to do is just solder these on these bricks. Now you might want to put your heat mat underneath this. Don't worry about the solder landing on concrete or anything, because it will just flick off. But if you are using a table like I am, so that it doesn't mark the solder, doesn't mark the table, you can just use a mat. I'm using 22mm pipe to give you a better illustration of the soldering. So now I've got my solder, and I've just pulled a bit out, and I've put a little hook on the end of it. The reason why I put a little hook on it is because when I'm going to heat up the fitting, I can just tap around the back and pull it around forward. Now the idea of this is that you want to heat up the fitting only, and once we keep the flame on the fitting, you don't want to be taking it away, putting it back on, and keep doing that, because what happens is the fitting will carbon up, and the solder won't flow around it. I'll show you what happens when we do that. So the way this works is by a capillary reaction. Now a capillary reaction is when heat is applied, and then what happens is the solder will flow naturally to wherever the heat is. So that's why we want to keep the flame on the fitting only. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this on, and I'm going to put even heat all around the fitting. So I'm just going to turn the blowtorch on, which is gas knob on, push the piezo button in, turn that down a bit, push that button there, so now our flame will keep on constantly. So now what I'm doing, my flame's on the fitting, and I'm just going to gently heat up the back of the elbow, and making sure that the flame wraps around the fitting. So this normally takes about 10 seconds with 15mm pipe, but this is 22, so it's going to take a little bit longer. So what we're looking for the end here, they call it foaming from the mouth. And what happens is it's like lots of white little bubbles appear at the end of the fitting, and once we start to see that, then we know it's time to put our solder in. So that's looking about now. I'm just going to touch it there and then move the flame slightly over to the other end, and I'm just going to touch it around the back there, and you can still remove the flame and insert the solder in there for a couple of seconds, and then just give it a little flick on the bottom. Now that will take about literally 10 seconds to set, but that will be really hot, so you want to at least leave it for a minute or so and then come back with a damp cloth to cool it down and wipe away the remaining flux. So now that we left it, we can give it a bit of a wipe. This will cool it down as well. If you are doing this in your garden, you might just want a bucket of water, so after a couple of minutes you can just dip it in just to cool it down a little bit quicker. Now you may have noticed me giving this a little flick underneath afterwards. There's good reason for that, is because we want to remove the remaining solder that's on the bottom there, and if we don't do that, as you can see, there's a sharp little point here. Now this point will actually stab your finger or your hand if you go and put your hand underneath it. So that's why we give it a little flick, and then the solder will drop on the floor. You probably will experience it sometime in your career in plumbing, where you go to put your hand around a pipe and someone hasn't flicked it and it stabs you in the hand, and it is really nasty. So what we do, we will get rid of that, and the way we do that is we just going to put a little bit of heat on it, just enough just to get rid of that. Some guys in the trade call it a bit of snot. I'm sure there's other names for it, but we're going to get rid of that by just literally flicking it. Leave that for a minute. Just give it a nice wipe all the way around, just to remove the flux. Now, as you can see around there, that's all. There's a nice ring of solder around it, and the same on the other side. There's a nice ring around there as well.